Hello, people of the internet. We are clearly living in interesting times right now, and as such, what would have been a presentation is now an audio presentation. I have put this together for you, and this is the first time I've ever done anything like that, so please forgive me for any shoddy craftsmanship. The presentation I'd like to give you today is on audience choreography for augmented reality. Now, what I mean by this is we make games that take place in the real world, and we make games that take place with lots of people at the same time. Organising those people to move around the space is an interesting challenge. Let me tell you a little bit more about my background. So, my name is Tony Porteous. I am a technical designer who has been working in video games for over 10 years and has been working in immersive theatre for 3. I come from a background of programming, but I use programming to support a career as a systems designer. Mostly I'm solving the more mathematical and the more systemic problems rather than the artistic problems that face a game creation. The company I've been working for is Fire Hazard Games. Fire Hazard Games is a very interesting company. We've been making site-specific experiences in London, but all around the world as well, for over 6 years. To understand a little bit more about what Fire Hazard do, we put together theatrical moments with actors and agents, with massive players all working together at the same time, and we tie this all together with a mobile phone driven server backend, which controls who goes where and when. Let me tell you a little bit more about this. Let me tell you about City Dash first, which is the oldest Fire Hazard game. This involved a 60-minute race between 60 to 100 people around a small area of London looking for clues. They were given those clues via their mobile phone, but what made this more interesting was that there were guards who were chasing them throughout this. If the guards caught them, you lose points. As such, you have an interesting game of cat and mouse which takes place in the streets of the city. Another game we've made early on is Raiders of the Lost Archives, which took the same approach of solving clues in an environment, but rather than the high-octane version, it was more cerebral, moving around museums and other cultural landmarks. We found that this was better for a different audience and involved a different set of constraints. But more constraints then was Shadows over Southwark, which was played at night on the streets and parks of London, where we had actors now dressed as monsters who were chasing you down. This was a brilliant horror experience. Again, you were looking for clues and trying to solve things against a clock, and again competing with 60 to 100 people. But the nighttime added again a different set of constraints. And then there is Undercover. Undercover is another early product that we quite love, involving a game where you don't actually know who else is playing. We had actors who were secret agents giving you different assignments to perform, most of these based around the hiding and retrieving of secret documents on the streets of London. Again, because you didn't know who was involved and arranging handovers, constraints were curious. We've done a lot of other things as well. We've worked with Jean Le Carré, we've worked with Endemol and the Hunted experience, we've worked with various different museums, and we've worked in various different countries as well. We've had games in Australia, Canada, Budapest, Russia, Prague, and so on and so forth. What you may have seen me say a lot here is about constraints, because the heart of any good game design is how you handle the constraints you're presented. I'm hoping to give you a talk here about some of the interesting challenges we faced in making site-specific games, things that you wouldn't have to deal with digital content at all. As such, I think this will give you an insight into how you have to solve problems which may be useful for your own careers. I'm now going to take you through 3 of the core problems that we have faced in site-specific gaming. Each of these will demonstrate the constraints that we're faced with and how we've overcome them. I hope from this that you'll get some insights that you can take into your own development. The first of these is the queuing problem, which is about giving people space to play. Let me try to explain this a little bit more. We make live games, and we make games with lots of people at the same time. We do this because we want these games to have energy. Competing with other people gives a game energy. Seeing other people playing gives a game energy. Being in a crowded space energizes the space. We call this buzz. We could make a game that has no queuing constraints by having just a single team playing at the same time. Now, this would have some budgetary issues, obviously, but even then, we would lose something by doing so. People would not be as motivated by what they're doing. However, on the flip side of this, intimacy is the crucial factor in immersive and interactive experiences. Queuing is the bane of immersive theatre. When you are waiting to do something because another team is in front of you talking to the actor or solving the clue, all your energy is draining out of this. How do we have the buzz of lots of people playing together, but without the challenge and the drain that comes from waiting? Also, if you're seeing someone else solving a problem, just by being close by, even if you're doing something different at that point, it can ruin that content for you. What you see when you're playing this game matters. Conversely, what you see when playing these games matter. We have found that when one team sees another being chased by a monster in shadows, when they are subsequently chased, they scream louder and laugh harder. There is something of a social proof element to seeing other people doing fun things that makes you enjoy them more, and we want to capture that without spoiling the experience. So, ultimately, the queuing problem is down to how do you gather your people when it's fun but spread them out when it's not? Let me take you through some key learnings. First of all, sandbox your content. By this I mean, do not make your street content a long roller coaster with players going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. No matter how you stagger your players, the team in front will take too long and the team behind will traffic jam into them. You need to spread your content out such that it can be achieved in any order. This limits what you can do, but it means that your players will naturally spread themselves out. They will naturally go where it's not too busy. Once you've done this, you now need to measure your content and make sure simply you have enough of it. As a simple starting metric, if you have 60 teams in your game, you need 60 locations in order to assure that none of them are overlapping or in the same area at the same time. Now in practice, because you want some social proof, you can probably get away with 75% of this number, so that 25% of the time you'll have teams where another team are. And equally, you need to account for transit time between points. If players spend 50% of their time at a location doing something and 50% of their time moving between locations, this halves the amount of content you need, roughly speaking, back of the envelope calculations. Finally, distance is your friend. Spacing your content out means that people at adjacent content aren't going to oversee things, even if they are close by. But on that subject, it's not really about distance. Distance can help and solves other problems, but it's more about line of sight. If you have a simple brick wall with one piece of content on one side of it and one on the other, they are in separate locations as far as the player understands, even though they are right on top of each other. So when you're building your maps of content, you need to identify what your sight breaks are and use them to scale just how far away things conceptually are from each other. So, in conclusion to the queuing problem, sandbox your content, measure how much you need, and use sight breaks to identify things. There are a million more things that go into this. Hopefully this is just a brief sample of what can be used to solve this sort of problem. The next problem I'd like to take you through is what we call the pacing problem. This is no longer about how players play with each other and more about a single team's experience and making sure that that experience is a satisfying one when moving around real-world space. I'm going to use City Dash as an example, as it's quite simple. In City Dash, we hide checkpoints somewhere in the world. You're given a rough grid location and a hint on how to find it within that grid location. So the players will be navigating to different areas of the city and performing a tight clue-based search within that area. Here is a sample layout. Now you can see that the clues are being positioned in something of a haphazard manner. Now there are problems with this layout. The primary one is that this will lead to player frustration. We clearly have two islands of activity with no bridge between them. If a player completes one island, they will be frustrated by the long distance they have to travel to get to the next piece of content. Also, they're very linear in their approach, and as such there are places where there is only one clear clue to go to next. We want our players to always be faced with a choice of where to go next. In a sandbox game, having a strategy leads to player satisfaction. This is a potential solution for this. As you can see, the clues have now been placed in a much more grid-like fashion, and as such, the player will always have decent decisions to make. Unfortunately, this is boring. The clues are too evenly spaced out, and as such, the 90-minute experience our players are going to have is going to be very samey, with a clue solved every 5 minutes for 90 minutes. A good experience is a roller coaster, with periods of intensity followed by periods of relaxation, peaks and troughs. Here is a good solution. Clustering. Now here we have areas of tight activity with clues that are very close to each other that we will solve in 30 seconds, and then a small period of moving to one of many other clusters to go to. Now obviously this will mean that you'll have to make more content in order to satisfy your players, but it's good to think in terms of this to get that nice flow that will satisfy your players. So, the pacing problem. Always have a path forward, always have multiple options for your players, and make sure you're thinking about giving that roller coaster-like feel to the experience. How you position your content in the world has to work for each individual moment of content, but also for the 90-minute experience as well. Finally, I want to talk about the congregation problem. Now, the queuing problem was about spreading your teams up sensibly around your game zone. The pacing problem was about how an individual team consumes the content, but this is about getting your teams to a particular location, generally in order to meet someone else. At Fire Hazard Games, we handle this in one of two ways. The first is you are meeting with an actor. This could be to have a photo opportunity, it could be to receive some additional mission instructions or theatrics, or it could be for its own unique game element. In one of our shows we built escape rooms that you have to solve partway through the experience, which were one team at a time. In all cases, this is our premium content. We're hiring people and building tools for this, and we want to get as many teams to this and through this content as possible, but only one team can do it at a time. The other approach is when we want one team to meet another. This could be for a duel or an individual challenge, a meeting and a sharing of information, or the classic example we have is the suitcase swap, which we try to do in Undercover. This is self-generating content. Anything where players are competing and acting directly with other players is infinitely extendable with the number of players you've got, whereas actors are limited by their own time and how much we can afford to hire. The trouble is, time is precious. If we've got an actor who's summoned a team to see them and then wait 15 minutes for that team to get lost, then we've wasted 50 minutes of actor time that could have been spent serving to other teams. If we have one team that arrives early for a meeting and the second team arrives late, one of those teams is going to be frustrated by the whole show as a consequence. Every second really does matter when it comes to this congregation of players. And there's a lot of ways that the delays can add up. I'm now going to take you through the 6 ways that we have identified and some of the approaches to solving them. Let's talk about the allocation delay first. Now this is about the time it takes to decide who should meet and where, but more importantly it's about waiting for a team to become available. If all your teams are busy, your actor could be idle, or the other team will not have anyone to meet with. Digital tools make this an awful lot easier because a computer can immediately make decisions based on the current state of all players at any given time. What is important is to give that computer a sample pool of players to choose from. One way to do this is to make your game turn-based. Not in the sense that the player sees turns, but that new missions get assigned all at the same time. And as such, that means that teams will be coming out of missions simultaneously, giving a large number of options for the computer to choose from. If you can do this and structure your game to do so, it will make allocation effortless. Next, let's talk about notice. Now, a team may be given a mission to meet someone, but they may take up to 15 minutes to check their phone and realize that they have a new instruction because they're focused elsewhere. If your mission is critical, other people are waiting, then you need an active alert on this. You need their phone to vibrate and ring, and you need whatever they're doing to be interrupted. It needs to be effectively blocked, because the players will have one stream of activity that they're currently focused on, and they're going to want to finish it before they look at anything else. Another important point of this is to pick your moments. If you know that a team is about to be idle and looking for a new task, this is the perfect team to pick for a meeting. Third is the reading time. Once you've given the team an instruction, they're going to have to read it and they're going to have to understand it. They have a lot of things that they're going to need to know if they're going to attend this meeting. Good UI is critical here. If the user interface is confusing, the team will struggle, so keep your words concise, keep your instructions clear, and if possible, anything that doesn't get them moving, delay it until they are moving. Tell them that they need to go north, and once they've started moving north, then give them the rest of their instructions. Next, of course, is the travel time. The further a team is away, the more time it will take. Simple things such as waiting at traffic lights can be surprisingly delayful, and as such you need to think about what the real length of travel is versus the presumed length of travel. Also, if there is some form of sight break or decision to make, do I go left or right? Do I go into this building? It's going to effectively double the amount of time it's going to take your team to get there. Obviously, good proximity detection techniques to make sure that you're picking the teams that are closest to the meeting point are crucial here. You can do that with good tools, but you can also do it by designing your zones such as crucial meeting points have a lot of nearby content. We call this orbital content, and that way we can guarantee almost that a team is going to be nearby when it comes time for the next meeting. Next, we have the location delay. This is about once a team has arrived, they need to find their content. This could be an actor or another team who are milling around the area. If the area is crowded, then it's going to take longer. If the area has a lot of sight breaks again, such as different rows in a library, it is going to take longer. You can simplify this by having costume signifiers. If your actors all have an identifying feature, or you've asked all of your players to attend with some form of identifying feature, people will locate each other faster. Clear instructions of where precisely to be will help, and obviously picking locations which are not confusing will significantly reduce this. Finally, you have the length of time that the scene itself will take. Whatever the players are doing will take an amount of time, and you'll have to factor this in when you're calculating just how many scenes you can run in your show. One clever thing here, however, is that you do not have to wait for one scene to finish before you start the next team inbound. The moment you start a scene off, you can summon the next team in if you can guarantee that it will be finished by the time the next scene arrives. You could even have the next team summoned in whilst the first team is still in transit. The more you can assure and minimize each of your delays such that they are a precise amount of time, the more likely and the more precise you can have these scenes. On one side, you do not want your teams queuing to wait for the experience. On the other, you do not want your actors to be idle. So, the congregation problem in a nutshell is that time is valuable and actors are expensive. Identify all the things that can delay the arrival of a team to your meeting point and obliterate them however you can. So this was a brief tour of 3 of the core problems that we face in site-specific augmented reality games, but there are many other constraints that we have to factor in. We are making games in the real world, and that means a world that is not designed for what we're doing, and as such it's never going to be a perfect fit. Obviously, we're trying to make games that really utilize the city, and as such we want to warp our content to fit around the key landmarks and to tell the stories of the space. We also need to be careful of safeguarding and make sure that the spaces that we are using for events and challenges are not in or near areas that might be dangerous, or even ones that feel dangerous to the players. And finally, there is the matter of courtesy. We're sharing a space with the general public, and as such we want to make sure that we're not encouraging people to do things that would disrupt other people's use of the space, or encouraging people to go on private property. There are also a lot of practical concerns. We generally need a venue, and finding a space that has an affordable venue for 100 people in central London is a challenge. Equally, you've got to account for changes of plan. If there are roadworks closing off a key location, or someone else, such as a protest march, is using a location, we need to have backups built into things. And of course, there is budget. All of these things are going to warp and shape the landscape of your game, where you place your locations and how people travel between them. Ultimately, there is no perfect solution for this. Working with digital content, you are free to craft it more to be what you need, and you do not have to deal with constraints in quite the same way. I hope that by seeing what it's like in the real world and working with site-specific content, you can have a perspective that will be really useful for crafting of digital experiences. So, I've taken you through a fair few things today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my words. If you do have any questions, my name is Tony Porteous, and you can contact me at the links provided here. Have a nice day.